Vatlva. Not to be confused with baklava, one of course being a delicious layered pastry from Turkey, the other being this weird car combat isometric Saturn thing. It's an arcade game with the main focus of plot being to destroy all the other competition, and I think like the top 3 elite guys might be evil, so defeat them and save the world. Maybe. Now right off the bat, you might notice that this looks kind of similar to that weird Game Boy Advance driving RPG, Car Battler Joe. And if you did notice this, you have a very discerning eye, because the game was not only directed by the same person, but a lot of the same people who worked on Car Battler Joe actually worked on this. Taking the connection between Car Battler Joe and this one step further, among the playable characters, in fact the first listed playable character, is a much older Joe. So yeah, this is the sequel to Car Battler Joe. Or that was the prequel to this. Either way, they're interconnected in a good many different ways. And because of this, there is much Super Super Carmobiling to be done in this game. Now at its core, Vatlva is a top-down vehicular combat game. And as far as car combat games go, this one's actually pretty interesting. Most car combat games rely on power-ups and weapon pickups to take out your opponent. This one, not so much. There are no weapon pickups to be had in this game. Instead, your Super Super Carmobile starts out completely kitted out with various weapons. In fact, each of the 6 Saturn face buttons control one different weapon. Each weapon also corresponds to a certain section on your car. If this section takes too much damage, suddenly that weapon is no longer usable. Further expanding on weapons, while each and every character has a different vehicle, and their weapons are a little bit different, the core concept to each weapon is the same. Everyone has a missile, everyone has a bomb, everyone has a relatively close-range weapon, as well as a generic gun and shield. Now while the general gameplay works quite well, the biggest gameplay issue I have with it is the control. And I'm gonna be completely honest here, I only use the very basic starting control scheme. There are a few others, but the movement in this game is a little bit awkward. Again, at least with this control scheme. Essentially, it has each directional button on your directional pad corresponding to turning, if you're not facing that direction, as well as acceleration, with brake and reverse applied to the L shoulder button. So basically, you're going to constantly be moving forward unless you're directly on top of that, which is definitely a strange control scheme to have. Now again, there are others I didn't use, but this is the default one, and it just seems strange that such a weird control scheme would be, at the very least, set to default. Beyond that, combat works well. Each car does feel a little bit different. I mean, one's a freaking spider for crying out loud. And they all have their own unique weapons, despite them all falling into specific archetypes of similar weapons. And because of this, gameplay feels varied, depending on what map you're on, depending on who you're fighting, and who you're fighting as. And overall, that makes gameplay pretty fun. And I mean, come on, when you defeat an opponent, you can then run them over. That's just awesome. Presentation-wise, Vatlva looks quite nice. All the different Super Super Carmobiles look unique, and I think are kind of reflective of the personality of their characters. With one exception, one of the 3 elite guys actually uses basically a recolor of another character's, which is unfortunate. And weirdly enough, it's the only time in the game that happens, so why they couldn't spring for one extra character model, I don't know. The environments, however, feel a little bit lackluster. Certainly you've got cool levels like the stadium and the islands, but for the most part they all look kind of bland and industrial, or just a generic city complex or something. And it's unfortunate because you do have a few really cool levels, which makes it feel like there's definitely promise and creativity in the level design. It just felt like it got a little lazy with most of them. The audio presentation is pretty fantastic, and the soundtrack, while not terribly memorable, is really freaking catchy. Not to mention eclectic. The theme song to this game is generic pop, but this game also has bagpipes. I mean, come on. If that doesn't scream eclectic, I don't know what does. And I think that the eclectic soundtrack complements just how different this game is compared to other vehicular combat games. Because, I mean, sure, There are other vehicular combat games, but they're not typically top-down, and they typically follow a different set of mechanics than Vatlva decided to go with. So I think it rounds out a rather weird package quite well. And at the end of the day, that is Vatlva. It's a bit of a strange game. I guess you could kinda sorta maybe consider it like the analogous Saturn equivalent to Twisted Metal, I guess? Although I guess control-wise, I'd say this game is way better than Twisted Metal, and that's saying something. Ultimately, Vatlva is a strange little thing. If you want a copy, as a Saturn import, typically it won't cost you more than maybe $10. Although I have noticed that this one is pretty uncommon all the same. I've only seen 2 or 3 copies on eBay, but once again, none of them were ever expensive. And while this certainly isn't the best Saturn game ever, hell, I wouldn't even call it all that great a game, it is certainly an interesting little pickup, and it's entertaining and fun for what it needs to do. And at its price, I'd say, yeah, pick it up. Vatlva is pretty good. I mean, it's no Car Battler Joe, but it's still a pretty good start.